Hey you, have you ever wanted to be God? Well, have you ever heard of Risk of Rain? Risk of Rain is a looter shooter where gamblers are rewarded and the mentally insane are revered. The speedrunners are having a field day with this one since the game pressures you to play it as fast as possible, since as time increases, so does the difficulty. You start as Buzz Lightyear, who after a few too many beers yearns for power and violence, much like you will after you play this game. You crash down on a planet and your goal is to activate teleporters, delving you deeper within the confines of this planet. You break into chests to obtain other people's mail along the way and ultimately kill God or die trying. The games are known for being chaotic and that's what makes them so damn good. It's a simple concept done right the first time and better the second. If you've been alive during the last 3 years, you've probably heard of Risk of Rain 2. But have you ever stopped for a moment to think that it's called 2 for a reason? The first game sold a sizable amount of copies, but despite that, not as many people acknowledge its existence. It's at this point I should mention that both games were made by 3 extremely attractive men who have stolen at least $45 from my wallet, and I don't want them to give it back. If you have eyes, you might notice that Risk of Rain 1 is 2D, while the second game is 3D. This is what I like to call a business expansion. For an early access game, 2 had clean animations, the graphics were stylized and visually appealing, and most importantly, there were barely any bugs. Risk of Rain 1 definitely didn't look bad for a pixel game. The devs did a great job conveying enemies and items into coherent sprites, while still managing to keep them appetizing. 1 was made in GameMaker and 2 was made in Unity, which is surprising because I never thought a GameMaker game could be one of my favorites. Another major difference between the two is how the items and characters work between games. The second game had the same objective and had quite a few cameos from the first game, leaving veteran players with the same items and characters they knew and loved, now applied to a 3D space, and left new players with a playground of toys and trinkets. You see, most of the characters work based around the same theme as they did in the first game, the only difference being that there's a whole new dimension to work with. To say that it allowed for change and new ability options would be a spit in the face. No, it allowed for the evolution of the abilities and how the game is fundamentally played, for the better. Speaking of which, you might think it'd be hard to translate abilities, items, and characters that were made for a 2-dimensional space into 3 dimensions. And it probably was, though that sometimes required a total rework on the object. The same can be said with items to a degree. The second game reintroduced most of the old items while adding twice as many new ones to the roster. But before we get too deep into how some of the individual items work, I should probably explain how they work as a whole. Items are divided into multiple colored tiers: white, green, red, yellow, and orange. Your white items are your bread and butter: soldier syringe, energy drink, and crowbar to name a few. Green items are slightly less common and offer some more power to your build than white items can, such as the ukulele. Red items are the most rare and generally hold the most power within a single item and can be run altering depending on what you get, like the unstable Tesla coil. After you kill the teleporter boss on a stage, various items will drop out of it, and sometimes these items will be yellow. Yellow items are unique to the teleporter and will randomly drop according to the boss that was defeated. Orange items are essentially a new ability. They generally have a large cooldown and can save your life if used right. These 5 item tiers are shared between both Risk of Rain 1 and Risk of Rain 2, though 2 new tiers of items were added to the sequel, these 2 tiers being blue and purple. But we'll talk about these ones later. Blue items were introduced into the second game as a sort of trade-off system. Sacrifice half of your health to double your damage output but become susceptible to instant death, or perhaps double your health but convert it all to shields, negating any healing items you may have or find later. Blue items are extra special because they require a different currency than the gold you get by killing enemies. They take lunar coins, which are kept between runs and are randomly dropped by any enemy. Or, change a number value within your files, but you didn't hear that one from me. The main way of getting any blue item is to find a hidden newt altar and offer 1 lunar coin to it. After the teleporter event, a blue portal will open, giving you the option to travel to the bazaar between time. This is a shop run by a large newt that offers blue items and places to transmute lower tiered items into higher tiered ones. Conveniently while you're here, the timer is stopped, which, in case you forgot, means the difficulty won't increase. Now I know that was a lot to take in, and you're probably thinking, oh well, all these items are cool and all, but they probably don't even stack. Every item in this game stacks, and there's no limit on how many of anything you can have. Want to travel across the map instantly? Easy, just find a couple of red whips and push the W key for 1 second. Want to attack faster than your enemies spawn? Just find 20 soldier syringes and hold down your left click button. This applies to everything, and while some items are godly, some are interesting, I guess. Most of the time you'll get decent items and have a somewhat alright run until you ultimately die. Or sometimes you get the meat, cheese, and both buns of the burger and annihilate things as soon as they spawn in, making you unstoppable in most, if not all, cases. Though with great power comes great responsibility. The more items you have, the more potential for lagging the hell out of your game. Perhaps that is the true blue item. Have as many items as you want, or preserve your graphics card. Well, anyway, items are great and all, but last I checked, you don't play the game as a lump of items, so why don't I introduce the survivors? There are 12 playable survivors in Risk of Rain 1 and 14 in Risk of Rain 2, if you count the 2 DLC survivors, but we'll come back to those two. Every survivor has 4 abilities, and in Risk of Rain 2, survivors have alternate abilities that you can unlock through challenges specific to them. Like I stated before, most of the characters from Risk of Rain 1 made it into the second game, if not altered in some way to fit the 3D environments. In both games, you start with only having Commando unlocked. In the first game, he kinda blows. But in the second game, he can kick some ass, but still blows, especially when compared to other survivors. Every other survivor is unlocked by completing some challenge or by finding some secret. Every character is unique and well thought out, and I feel none of them are exceptionally good, nor so far thrown into the dirt that they're unplayable. In Risk of Rain 1, if you wanted to win, you'd pick Handy, a robot janitor who is insanely destructive and can heal from any distance if you've killed a single enemy. Needless to say, he didn't make it into the second game. Personally, I'm a Loader fan. Her unmatched mobility pairs well with her powerful attacks that deal damage based on velocity, which leads to me extendo gripping a tree and launching myself at Mach 5 into an unsuspecting creature. Loader's also a great example of the changes made to certain survivors. She still has her grapple arm like in the first game, but it was a point A to B grapple, whereas in the second game, it swings. It is both the character and the items that make the run, not one or the other. Though, depending on your survivor, some items can be run killers. Rex, another one of 2's survivors, regenerates health with some abilities, but costs health to use others. If we introduce him to a funny-looking beetle, which converts all health to shield, he becomes utterly useless as he has no health to use abilities, nor can he regenerate health due to the lack of it, causing a swift death. And actually, speaking of death, it's been 8 minutes and 10 seconds, and I haven't even talked about the inhabitants of this godforsaken planet. So, let's do that. These games insult you for dying, and you should feel bad about it, because it was definitely your fault. The hellspawns that deliver death served hot on a silver platter come in many shapes and sizes, especially shapes. Some enemies are unique to a stage, and some will be on every stage, though as difficulty increases, you might see them on a stage they don't normally belong to. Your basic enemies include Lemurians, Wisps, and Beetles, while your stronger enemies consist of Beetle Guards, Elder Lemurians, and Greater Wisps, which are just bigger versions of the basic ones. Of course, there are more than just these ones, but you'll only encounter others as time goes on and you see new stages. Next up are the bosses. These fools spawn during a teleporter event and range from molten worms to even larger beetles. Once a run's difficulty has gotten high enough, bosses can spawn as uncommon enemies. On a side note, every enemy and boss has a random chance of being an elite, which just gives them a unique attribute and more health, or in later cases, being highly inconvenient and run-ending. They get more common with higher difficulty. Every boss is unique, and all provide a bit of spice to the insanity that is the teleport event. Also, apparently some of them even have unique attacks that they only ever do once, like there was this one time I was playing with a friend and an overloading magma worm shot straight up into the sky and crashed both of our games. That was a 2-hour run, by the way. Now we've done all this talking about the gameplay, but not about where you actually play the game. So how about we talk about the stages? When you first start a run, you'll end up in one of a few stages, each stage having a few alternate versions to keep it fresh. Just about every stage has some small secret on it, and there's almost always a newt altar tucked away somewhere. After every teleporter event, you'll be warped to a new stage. Stage 5 is always the same, being the Sky Meadow in 2 and the Temple of the Elders in the first game. Here, you'll be given a choice. Loop through the last 4 stages again with more items to collect, or commence onto the final stage. In the second game, the stages are crafted in such a way to allow for open fights and mobility options to get out of a fight if you need to. I can't really say the same for the first game since it's a 2D platformer and the game wasn't based on mobility nearly as much as 2 was. All the stages across both games really convey an aesthetic that truly shows you are trespassing on an alien territory and that you are not welcome. The second game does this really well as it adds lore and environmental stories to each location which can be read up in logs scattered randomly across the levels. It also achieves this better probably because it's a 3D game. Go figure. Here's a fun little tip for all you newbies out there. On the abandoned aqueduct, there are 2 buttons hidden around the map, generally by rocks. Once both are pushed at the same time, this door will open which leads to a small mini-boss fight which, if completed, will net you 2 strong items and unlock them forever. How you push both buttons at the same time is up for you to figure out. Another little thing, if you struggle finding the teleporter because God knows it's hidden sometimes, there are floating particles around it that you can see from just about anywhere. Other than that, there's not much more to the stages other than I suppose you can choose what the next stages will be if you happen to take a lunar portal. It'll cost you though. So without further ado, let's get into everyone's favorite, or least favorite, part of the video. The lore. Allow me to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there were 2 brothers, Providence and Mithrix. Both brothers lived on a lively planet full of critters and creatures full of soul. Providence loved soul. Mithrix did not care for such a thing. Mithrix loved design and form, power over soul. Though they didn't agree upon everything, they got along well enough and together created constructs and creations that would protect them or take them across the stars in an instant. Over time, though, their disagreements became more apparent, and each instance of Mithrix crushing Providence's beloved creatures, and each instance of Providence putting too much soul into their constructs tore them apart. Until one day, after the creation of an interstellar gate to the moon of their planet, Providence told Mithrix to go through first. Providence did not step in after, and instead closed and locked the gate, leaving Mithrix alone. All alone away from him. Forever. Mithrix loathed his brother, plotting a way to Earth to destroy it just so he could see the look on his brother's face. Until then, the brothers could create whatever they wanted without the hindrance of one another. But no creation would ever be the same again. An unknown amount of time after this event, you are Commando. You are aboard the UES Contact Light, a cargo and research ship. The ship is passing over Petrichor 5 after taking a small detour. An expedition team pulls up one of the teleporters created by the brothers. Providence teleports onto the contact light, destroying the entire ship and half of its crew. The remaining crew escape through drop pods. This is where Risk of Rain 1 starts. You eventually make it to the site of the crashed contact light through the previously mentioned teleporter. It is here you kill Providence and use what's left of the ship to escape. Fast forward another unknown amount of time, and the UES Safe Travels is deployed on account of a rescue mission for the remaining survivors on the planet. You are Commando, not to be confused with Commando. You are deployed on this planet to find any refugees. You make it through many teleporters and end up on the moon, and ultimately kill Mithrix. After your escape, the moon seemingly gets teleported elsewhere. That just about sums up the general story. There's some other stuff you can read on the wiki or go watch some other video that dives deeper if you want to learn more. Due to the release of the DLC that came out not too long ago, there have been some additions to the lore among other things. But quickly, I'd like to talk about something you've been hearing this whole time. The music. I really felt this one needed its own small section because of how badass this soundtrack is. Remember earlier when I said that this game was made by 3 people? The composer is one of them, and while technically he didn't do any of the actual coding or design, the game sure wouldn't be the same without his music. Just about this entire time I've been writing this script, I've been listening to both 1 and 2 soundtracks to get me into the headspace for this video, and let me tell you, the difference between the two games is astronomical. I'm not throwing any shade on the first game's music, it's really good, but the evolution of talent and motifs and general ambiance of stages is truly on another level. The gap between these games was about 6 years, and you can truly tell that the composer Chris Christodoulou has gotten much better. I'm going to fanboy a little bit here because I own all the music from Risk of Rain 2 on vinyl, and it's probably my favorite part of the games. On the final stage of Risk of Rain 1, Coalescence starts playing, a 6-minute wind-up to an insane melody of drums and guitar. It's gotta be one of my favorite tracks and sets the mood perfectly for what's going on. Chris joked about making Coalescence 2 since everyone enjoyed it so much, but we obviously never got it. This was before Risk of Rain 2 existed. Since the game was in early access, it was a while before we got the final stage and an actual end to the game. When I saw that Chris released the music for that stage on YouTube, I listened to it instantly, and it was everything and more. It was another beautiful wind-up, and it took samples from Coalescence as if to tie the finality of both games into one. It was truly Coalescence 2, and it was worth the wait. A small yet wonderful thing I'd like to point out is that all the music is titled after some weather phenomenon, and so are some other things, keeping the whole Risk of Rain thing together. With all that out of the way, I think it's time to wrap up here by talking about this game's first DLC, The Survivors of the Void. Years before this DLC came out, a secret stage was added called the Void Fields. This place was unexplained, it was dangerous, and frankly, it was a little bit scary. The entrance was littered with these weird creatures, and there were some scattered in the fields as well. Only after a loop, these dudes would show up every now and then, and were by far the strongest enemy yet. They shot orbital strikes with their mind, and upon death collapsed into a sphere that, if caught in, would kill you and end the run instantly. Nothing was ever explained about them, and wouldn't be until about a year later with the release of the DLC. We finally get to come back to those items and characters I pushed aside earlier. With the addition of the Survivors of the Void DLC came a few new stages, a new item tier, 2 new survivors, a secret boss, more regular items, and of course, more lore. The new item tier was purple. Purple items were special in the sense that it was another sort of trade-off system. They were corrupted versions of an already existing item that did something along the same line as the original, but would corrupt all future versions of that item as well. Sometimes a corrupted item was a straight upgrade to the base item, depending on how you look at it. Next are the survivors. We are introduced to the Railgunner and the Void Fiend. The Railgunner is most certainly a nod to Sniper from the first game, as during early access development, Hupu Games held polls on which characters to add next, and Sniper was included, but never made it. I guess they wanted to keep them in anyway, and took the same concept, but heavily modified it. Sometimes the Railgunner can be tough, but she's ultimately very strong, and her alternate abilities are pretty damn good. While the Railgunner is unlocked by default, the Void Fiend requires some extra work to acquire. He is unlocked by either getting to round 50 in the Simulacrum, which is a new game mode added, or beat the new secret boss. The Void Fiend is actually one of my favorite characters, as he has quite an interesting gimmick. He has no alternate abilities, but during gameplay he has a wheel that's next to the crosshair that fills up over time or by taking or doing damage. Once the gauge fills completely, the Void Fiend is corrupted, which transforms all abilities into more aggressive versions. During this state, the corruption meter depletes. It can be filled the same way, and if your attack speed is high enough, you can be corrupted forever. Both gauges are depleted by healing, so if you have any passive healing items such as the Warped Fungus, you may never get corrupted. The Void Fiend does have a little compatibility with corrupted items though. For everyone he has, the minimum corruption is increased by 2%, which could potentially lead to being corrupted 100% of the time, which leads to a dangerous yet high damage playstyle. I'd like to go back to that secret boss though. Remember the Void Fields? If you can withstand 9 waves of onslaught, then you'll be given a choice: continue the run, or traverse deeper within the void. If you choose the latter, you'll enter the Void Locus. This place functions very similar to the moon right before the fight with Mithrix, and where you have to activate 4 pillars to proceed. Once 4 cells are activated and completed, a new portal will open up, taking you even deeper. Here, you will find the planetarium. As soon as you arrive, you may notice the vast amounts of planets and moons far in the distance. Not only does this give an enormous sense of scale in this place, but it also explains exactly where the moon went. If you can remember, after killing Mithrix, while you are charging the spacecraft, many Void Reavers arrive. After you leave, you can see them capture the moon. This is where they brought it. After admiring the scenery and lore implications, you are met with the Voidling. Whether this creature is in charge of the planetarium or the Void itself is unknown. The Voidling is incredibly dangerous, boasting a few high-powered attacks and 3 phases to the fight. In the final phase, the Voidling creates a bubble around itself that you must stay within or be exposed to the highly deadly Void damage. If you manage to defeat the Voidling, you escape with your life and unlock the Void Fiend. Though the logbook entry for the planetarium suggests other things. Perhaps this is the true ending of Risk of Rain. Well, that just about wraps it up for this video. So now if anyone ever asks you if you've ever heard of Risk of Rain, now you can tell them you have. Thanks for watching.